Добрий день і ласкаво просимо до третього випуску спільного проєкту Центру демократичних принципів та платформи «Аналізуй». У цих відео ми обговорюємо політичні та соціальні події в Європі в контексті російсько-української війни. В ці дні минає рік Великої війни Росії проти України, і в сьогоднішньому випуску ми даємо огляд реакції Європи на найкривавіший конфлікт у Європі з часів Другої світової війни. Я сподіваюся, що це відео буде для вас корисним. Якщо так, то обов'язково підпишіться на наш канал і натисніть на дзвіночок, щоб не пропустити наші нові відео. In autumn 2021, the US and UK started declassifying military intelligence that their agencies collected on Russian preparations for the major escalation of the war against Ukraine. To be fair, many in Europe were skeptical about the Americans and Brits sounding the alarm, but when the Russians did launch their attempt to invade Ukraine, few European leaders had any doubts of what exactly was happening. 2022 was not 2014, when some Western leaders were confused by little green men in Crimea or so-called pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass. The reality of February 2022 was crystal clear for all responsible European leaders. Russia started an unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine. This understanding became the foundation of the tough sanctions policy against Russia coordinated by all EU member states. But at that time there was zero consensus on Western military assistance to Ukraine. Unlike today, when we see that Ukraine is winning the war, in those early weeks of the Russian big war, many in the West feared that Ukraine would fall within weeks. Because of this, they did not see any point in sending heavy weapons to Ukraine, as they believed military deliveries would end up either with the Russians or with international criminals and terrorists. Ukraine's courage, fortitude and resilience not only ruined Russian plans to destroy the Ukrainian state, but also inspired Western nations and encouraged them to offer not only financial and humanitarian help, but also military assistance to Ukraine.
Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Would we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did.
Throughout the first year of the big war, the US remained the largest donor to Ukraine. Closer to the end of the year, however, the European Union surpassed the US in the value of total aid committed to Ukraine. But then the US outran Europe again. But let's see how different European countries responded to the escalation of the Russian-Ukrainian war, not only in terms of financial and military assistance to Ukraine, but also in other areas. If we want to start with naming 3 top countries in terms of overall support for Ukraine, we need to use at least 2 different approaches. For example, if we want to highlight the 3 European countries that have provided the most to Ukraine in terms of millions of euros, then these countries are Germany, United Kingdom and France. But if we compare the assistance provided to Ukraine by European countries to their economies, then the 3 top countries will be Estonia, Latvia and Poland, with Lithuania just a little bit lagging behind. Both approaches are legitimate, but out of these 7 countries, I want to start with Poland. Warsaw became the first European capital to have provided Kyiv with much-needed military assistance right after the start of the escalation. Ukraine received the first Polish convoy with ammunition already on the second day of the big war. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, together with Czech and Slovenian Prime Ministers, were the first group of European leaders who demonstrated their solidarity with Ukraine by visiting Kyiv on the 15th of March 2022. Later, Polish leaders would visit Ukraine more often than leaders of other European countries. Poland kindly accepted the largest number of Ukrainian refugees, almost 2 million, fleeing the horrors of the Russian genocidal invasion. Throughout the year, Poland remained one of the closest friends of Ukraine and one of the staunchest supporters of the country's European integration. In the beginning of 2023, Poland outran Germany as the second largest European provider of military assistance to Ukraine after the United Kingdom. Germany's size, economic might and political influence suggest special responsibility for security in Europe. But because of its role in the Second World War, Germany had long evaded any leadership role in Europe and abided by appeasement policies towards Russia. policies that had been underpinned by Germany's vested interests. The Russian full-blown invasion forced Berlin to start reconsidering its attitudes towards Moscow. The changes did not happen overnight, but today's Germany is not the same as it used to be. The country finally froze the two infamous Nord Stream projects and ended its shameful dependence on Russian energy supplies. Germany is currently the largest European donor to Ukraine in terms of overall aid and is one of the most important providers of military support. Ukraine is especially thankful to Germany for being the first country to supply modern air defense systems. Germany accepted over 1 million of Ukrainian refugees and in this area is second only to Poland. Together with Poland, the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, have consistently proven time and again to be Ukraine's closest European friends and allies. Estonia's and Latvia's assistance to Ukraine exceeds 1% of the country's GDP, a unique situation on the global level. The parliaments of Estonia and Latvia were first to recognize, in April 2022, the genocidal nature of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The Lithuanian parliament caught up on this recognition in May 2022. Lithuania, on the other hand, was the first European country to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Latvia caught up on this in August, Estonia in October 2022. Lithuania launched the first successful national campaign to raise funds for the purchase of a Turkish Bayraktar drone. Just within 3 days, Lithuania has collected more than 5 million euros. The Baltic states showed their solidarity with Ukraine on the important symbolical level too. For instance, all three countries issued coins dedicated to Ukraine's fight for freedom and democracy. The moral leadership of the Baltic states was instrumental in convincing many other European states to provide more aid to Ukraine. The UK has proven to be yet another faithful friend and ally of Ukraine. Already in January 2022, when many other European leaders deliberated on the declassified American and British intelligence on the Russian war preparations, the UK started supplying Ukraine with anti-tank weapons known as NLAW. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was the first European leader who called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just minutes after the first Russian rockets hit Ukraine. Johnson was also the first G7 leader who visited Ukraine during the big war and in the course of the year paid 2 more visits to Kiev in the capacity of UK Prime Minister. He stepped down in September. But London's support to Kiev did not end with Johnson's tenure. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak visited Ukraine in November 2022 and assured Zelensky that Britain stood firmly with Ukraine. The UK has so far provided more military aid to Ukraine than any other European country, and out of all non-EU democracies, the UK has taken in the largest number of Ukrainian refugees. French President Emmanuel Macron has often been criticized for his insistence on the need to keep talking to Russian President Vladimir Putin. But there has never been a slightest doubt in Macron's strong commitment to Ukraine and its existential struggle. Of course, all the talks about dialogue with Moscow are annoying, but they can be tolerated in the cases like the French one. France is the third largest European donor to Ukraine and shares with Italy the 5th place of Europe's biggest providers of military aid. French Caesar howitzers are especially of great help, and let's not forget that it was the French political decision to supply light tanks to Ukraine that unblocked the entire Western discussion about providing Ukraine with modern tanks, in particular with American Abrams and German Leopard tanks. Other European countries that have provided great political, financial and military support to Ukraine are the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Slovakia, Spain and Sweden. Let me first say a few words about Greece and Slovakia. Due to cultural and historical links with Russia, societies in these two countries are especially vulnerable to Russian propaganda and disinformation, and yet political leadership of these two countries have clearly demonstrated resilience against Russian malign influence and vicious pressure from Russian agents and useful idiots inside those countries. Now, Spain and Portugal are located quite far away from Ukraine, but they fully understand the significance of Ukraine's fight against Russia's unjustified and unprovoked aggression. Sweden and Finland's commitment to Western values and their sense of responsibility for safeguarding European security are qualities that neutral countries such as Austria, Ireland and Switzerland should definitely adopt. neutrality should not be an excuse for evading to address serious issues. Some of us, not me though, feared that the rise of right-wing populist leader Giorgia Meloni to power in Italy in 2022 would weaken Italy's support for Ukraine. Didn't happen. Italy remains faithful to the Western community of values. A number of European countries are clearly lagging behind others in financial and military support for Ukraine. Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta, Romania, Slovenia and Switzerland. However, some of these countries, for example neutral Austria and Switzerland, have provided important humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Countries like Romania, Ireland, Belgium and some others have hosted dozens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees, but there is still room for improvement for all the countries I've listed. The countries of Western Balkans, namely Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Serbia, need to finally make a civilizational choice. It may appear that Albania, Montenegro and North Macedonia have already made such a choice by joining NATO, but the Western community of values is not a bus stop that you can reach, get off and then do nothing. It is hard work and responsibility, and we haven't seen much of those from Western Balkans recently. Viktor Orban's Hungary is unfortunately a good example of how membership in two major Western clubs, NATO and the EU, may fail to safeguard against a slide towards authoritarianism and betrayal of the West. It matters little whether Orban is a Kremlin Trojan horse or he dishonors Hungary on his own volition. Orban's regime has not been simply unproductive in the context of European support for Ukraine. It has been disruptive and harmful. That perhaps was the reason why Orban was the only EU country leader who the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin greeted on the New Year. But it is perhaps unwise to waste words on Orban's regime. I would rather like to thank the Hungarian society for standing with the Ukrainian people and especially with Ukrainian refugees. More than 1 million refugees passed through Hungary since the start of the escalation, and without help of Hungarian volunteers, their lives would have been much harder. The Russian aggression represents the most significant challenge not only to Ukraine, but to entire Europe. Knowing this, the most progressive and advanced Western societies have supported Ukraine in its fight against the Russian genocidal aggression. And thanks to its own courage and endurance, as well as Western military and financial aid, Ukraine is winning the war. Its victory will ultimately define the European security architecture for decades. На цьому все. Якщо вам сподобалося це відео, тисніть вподобайку та кнопку підписатися. Залишайте свої запитання та коментарі.